Hey, Psych 2 students. It is April 1st. Hard to believe. And I don't know what I do with my pen. So we are starting or continuing on Chapter 7 notes covering anxiety disorders. So we did 3 of them yesterday. So we did generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and phobic disorder, or specific phobia or phobias. Okay, these are all in the DSM-5 categorized as anxiety disorders. And originally, I think I was going to do 6, but we're just going to stick with 5. So I've got 2 more that we're going to do today, and I'll give you a close-up of the chart. So if you want to get out your psych disorder chart, which again is one of your assignments for Chapter 7, to have it completed, this chart's going to be pretty big. I had somebody email me with asking me how many disorders you think that we're going to have. We'll probably have, I think, close to 15 is what we have. So, yeah, so you need to, and if your chart goes to more than 1 page, that's fine. You can just still turn it in. And it's still going to be the best way, probably just to keep everything simple and together. So let me grab my pen. Okay. All right. So anxiety disorders as a whole deal with when, and this is pretty, generalized anxiety disorder is a pretty good kind of poster description or poster disorder for the category of anxiety disorders, in that, again, these people's biological processes of anxiety are not working correctly. Again, fear and anxiety is something that we all have, that we all face, and we all deal with, but we just deal with it intermittently through our lives when we're, faced with a situation or stimulus that creates it. These people have anxiety and deal with it every day of their life. So again, remember back to our 4 criteria for abnormal. And one of the things the DSM really uses is how much does this impact your life? And these people with these disorders and the anxiety occurs so much in their life that it basically takes them out of life. Okay, so it dramatically impacts their daily functioning, their social functioning, and their ability just to live day to day. Okay, all right. So again, I want to get back to, anxiety is not only mental, but it's physical. So these people actually have a lot of physical symptoms as well. One of being which requirement, which is a panic attack. So make sure you have that. So that's our main distinguishing qualifier between people who have fear, anxiety, and then who have an anxiety disorder. Okay, now I can have a panic attack and not be diagnosed with the disorder and not actually be diagnosed with anxiety. Panic attacks do occur, but generally, if you're having them, there is something that's sparking that physical response. So that can lead to other issues, but it doesn't have to. Okay, but for these, it's a distinguishing, very prevalent part. So again, these people aren't just having a few panic attacks; they're having quite a bit, and they're daily, very frequent, and they're severe enough to where it takes them out of life. Okay, all right. So the last 2 are OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, and then PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, both of these again are anxiety. Okay, so they're both in the DSM-5 category of anxiety disorders. I'm sitting on my exercise ball, trying to stretch out my back. Okay, so OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So again, we're going to stick with obviously panic attacks. And we're going to have obsessions or obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors. Okay, so basically the symptoms are in the name of OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, they are different, and it's important that you know the difference between obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are unwanted, repeated thoughts, okay? Invading thoughts, automatic thoughts. So these subjects have thoughts that come into their mind automatically that they don't want, that are not pleasant. They create anxiety. They ruminate, which is they think and dwell on the thoughts that come quite a bit. So once they come into their mind, they work with them, they grab them, they think about them. They replay them over and over in their head, and these thoughts keep coming. And they're generally not very pleasant thoughts as well. Generally, they're persecution, fear, dread, those type of things. So again, I think we all can think about the time where we've had a song or something get stuck in our head and we can't get it out. Multiply that maybe times 1,000, and that's kind of what these people are going through with the obsessive thoughts. Okay, so repetitive, unwanted, automatic thoughts, they're invading thoughts. Okay, and then they develop a coping mechanism to deal with those thoughts, and that is they compulse. Okay, or they have a ritualistic behavior that they do. So while they're compulsing, it relieves the obsessing. So the compulsion is directly related and serves the purpose of helping them relieve the obsessive thoughts. If I'm doing something, a type of behavior, then it kind of deflects, distracts me from the thoughts that I'm having that I don't want. Okay. So example, obviously, is if I obsess about germs. I'm sure we've all heard the cultural term germaphobe. If I obsess about germs and cleanliness, I'm going to have a lot of problems, especially during this time with the coronavirus and it's spreading. These people are going to have a lot of difficulty because it's not only are they getting the unwanted thoughts all the time, but it's everywhere. It's on the media, it's on the radio. It's just everywhere with commercials. It's on YouTube. I saw it today. So they're going to compulse. They're going to develop some type of behavior to distract them from their thoughts. Okay. And the more thoughts that they have, the more ritualistically they do the compulsions. So the compulsions, they can do quite a bit because they're going to do them whenever they're having the thoughts, which is a lot. Okay. So back to germaphobe. So if I obsess about germs, then I will wash my hands. Okay. That's the obsession and the compulsion. Now, they do not have to match like that. That's one thing I want to kind of say here, make sure we distinguish. My obsessions actually don't have to relate to my compulsions at all. Now, movies and stuff, we kind of see that. And not to say that it doesn't happen, but it does not have to happen. The number one compulsion of OCD patients, I believe, is counting. So they develop some form of compulsive type counting in their mind. And the obsessions can be with cleanliness and germs, but can also be about death, religious type thoughts, anything that kind of creates dread, futuristic thoughts, stuff like that. I'm sure the coronavirus in and of itself, if you have OCD, is going to be an obsessive thought. It's obsessive in our culture, but for these people, you and I can kind of turn it on and off. We can watch the news about coronavirus, and then when we're not watching it, we're not thinking about it. But these people won't have that ability. I did have when I taught at Park Hill South, I had an OCD patient or a student who was being treated for OCD. And she talked to the class about it. And she's actually the one too that passed the psychic test. So the story that I shared about her, she's the same one. So she's had OCD. Her obsessive thoughts were religious in nature about, what's the right religion? What's going to happen when I die? I guess that's probably more what it was. What's going to happen when she dies? And she would just get these horrific, terrible thoughts and images that would repeatedly just come into her head. And so she counted. So she developed a counting type of system to where she would count. And she would count also, if you know that what your alarm clock looks like with the dashes, she would see every word or number in those dashes. And so she would count them. So she would count cracks, like she knew the number of cracks that she had to pass to get to my room when she walked to my class. She counted the clock. She counted when she read the letters. When she was reading, every letter was put into that alarm clock digital mode, and she counted the dashes. Same thing with math problems and so on and so forth. So she was constantly counting, constantly occupying her mind. It's like mental Olympics, mental gymnastics. I mean, the amount of brain energy and power and effort that she had to put in just to get through the day was amazing. But it's, she was just counteracting all of those obsessive thoughts that she was having, okay, about what was going to happen to her when she died. Okay. All right. This one is biological. Okay. And there's actually a lot of research out there that says this is the neurotransmitter serotonin. So OCD patients, there's a huge correlation with them having a deficit of serotonin in their brain. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and OCD patients, I think there's other neurotransmitters looking at, but that's kind of the big one that's standing out now in neuroscience, is that that's a deficit. So the SSRIs, any medication that increases serotonin greatly helps these patients. So, Prozac, Lexapro, Zoloft, I think are three big ones that they try that help. So again, it's a malfunction. It's a lack of a neurotransmitter in their brain. It's a deficit. Now we don't know exactly what causes that, because there could be environmental things there as well. Because we also know that there's some environmental, biological there. But again, it's not uncommon for somebody to have a traumatic experience, and then that goes into obsessive and compulsive types of behaviors. If you've watched Hoarding, they do hoard. OCD patients do hoard. That's part of the compulsive behavior. Okay, and actually, there's hoarding disorders in OCD now in the DSM-5. That's kind of changed. Okay, and then obviously this would be neurotic. Okay, so I'll show a close up here. So if you need to get it, you can. Okay. So OCD, so it's an anxiety disorder. Obviously panic attacks, which I'll talk about now. So the panic attacks come when the compulsions don't work, okay? Or when the obsessive thoughts get too intense or intense at certain times. They feel trapped by the thoughts. They feel like they're never going to end. And then that goes into a panic attack. Okay, biological and neurotic. So they do have panic attacks. Again, that's kind of the frequent diagnostic criteria that we have for these disorders. But they're mainly going to have them. They won't have them as much as obviously panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. Phobia, again, they're only going to have it when they come into contact with whatever it is that sparks them and their fear. This, they can have it pretty much anytime they have the obsessive thoughts. But at the same time, if they can't compulse, like if they're in a situation where the thoughts come in and they're not able to compulse easily or quickly, then they're going to have a panic attack. Okay. All right. I've got a video on Canvas that links to Glee, the movie Glee. Emma is diagnosed as OCD in the show. I don't watch the show very much. I just know there's videos out here with her, and it kind of goes into her therapy session as well. So, and her obsessive. And they go into her obsessions and her compulsions, which is why I kind of like the video, because they kind of go into, most of us know OCD by the compulsive behaviors, but you need to get into those obsessive thoughts as well, which creates the compulsion. Okay. All right. Lastly, we have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an anxiety disorder. This one is unique in that it is the only anxiety disorder that has psychosis. Okay, or it has a psychotic component to it. Okay, so there are panic attacks. We'll call flashbacks. Okay, all right. So now we're going to go environmental here. Okay, because you have to have a traumatic experience, right? So most of the time, this disorder is associated, rightfully so, with veterans, our military, who, in the duty and the line of protecting our country, the freedoms that we have, encounter some very traumatic, horrifying experiences. And anybody, now they're just more prone to them because they work and serve in an atmosphere in which they're more likely to encounter those. But I have PTSD and not be in the military. Actually, my AP kids, we have a former student who comes back, and she talks about she's diagnosed with PTSD, and hers is based from it's a medical based PTSD. So she had some traumatic experiences with medical issues that she had, which created the PTSD. So I also when I was doing my supervision hours, we treated somebody who was in a car accident. they hit a teenage girl. It was not their fault. The girl pulled out in front of him in a highway. He hit her, but he thought that he had killed her. Both ended up being fine, but it was that trauma of that thinking, of that thought, of that accident. And he suffered with PTSD for a long time after that, just reliving the situation over and over again. And if he heard a sound or a smell that reminded him of that, he would instantly go back to that place. Right. And so that's kind of what PTSD is about. I think you could teach a whole entire class on this disorder because it's evolved so much. We've come so much more to understand it. Unfortunately, war, fighting, and battles is a part of culture. And so we have people that kind of go through that, and the medical side as well. But again, so it's an anxiety disorder. And what it is that you've encountered something that you just don't have the ability to cope with at the time. Or later. It's a big coping mechanism that your mind and your body are doing to help you deal with just the horrific thing that you've endured. And that's where the flashbacks come in. So the flashback is different. They can have it while they're dreaming or when they're conscious and they're awake, but they're going to flash back and kind of relive the horrifying experience. And they're going to cease to be in reality. They're going to go to wherever it was that they encountered or go to a different place mentally. So that's where the psychosis comes in. So, the gentleman that was in the car accident, if he heard like screeching tires, revving engines, if he could smell gas or oil, he would actually go back to the accident. He would be there in the car hitting that other car. And he would immediately go there and he would just zone out. He would zone out completely and just go to a different place in his mind. And that's where the psychosis comes from, is these people actually relive it. I remember when I was just starting at Park Hill, so it was like 1990s, 94. There was a huge incident in Kansas City where police were called to a house downtown and there was shooting inside the house, so much shooting that they couldn't get in. They just kind of waited. And when they went in there, it was a Vietnam vet and he was having a flashback. So he was reliving a battle that he fought in the Vietnam War, and he was picturing Viet Cong soldiers coming out and rushing his position, and he had loaded weapons in the house and was shooting up his room. So again, the split from reality there, not as severe as when we say schizophrenia, but still just debilitating. Definitely, you can see where they have issues driving and so on and so forth. AP, we actually look at. America's Home Makeover in Ottawa, Kansas. We had a veteran who had a house made because he was struggling massively with PTSD and trying to get back into society because he kept having flashbacks from his time serving in Iraq. So that's kind of the disorder. So again, if I encounter anything horrific or terrifying, traumatic, I can develop PTSD, and it's a massive coping method that my brain will use to help me cope and process, which can take a very, very long time about what happened to me. It's also kind of the way the brain kind of stops functioning normally to kind of protect the individual. So, but it's environmental in the fact, now there's a whole bunch of biological components to it, but it's environmental in the fact that you have to have that traumatic experience, whether it's as a soldier, as a citizen, a civilian. Again, most of the time we would see it in people who are not in the military with a medical condition. Like they would have severe medical symptoms, and but nobody would be able to figure out what was wrong with them. That kind of certain people that can kind of be very traumatic, especially at times if they feel like they're dying. The symptoms are so severe that they feel like they're dying. They spend a lot of time on the internet looking for stuff and so on and so forth, which is never really a good idea. But as long as it's a traumatic event, it can create PTSD if it's viewed to be overwhelming and that you can't cope with it. Okay, so I'll hold this one up. Okay, so post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, the panic attacks, the flashbacks, it's environmental, and this one is the only one that's psychotic. Okay, it has a psychotic component in it of the 5 that we're talking about. So I'll start that one. Panic attacks come in. while they're having the flashbacks, after the flashbacks, or before the flashbacks occur. So getting back to the example of the gentleman that we counseled, he would, whenever he would have a stimulus outside that was getting ready to spark the flashbacks, he would kind of start to anticipate those and would have a panic attack during and before and after the flashbacks. And then sometimes if it wasn't a strong enough stimulus to enact a flashback, it would enact a panic attack. So, and again, a lot of that would be unconscious. He would not be looking for things. There could just be random things that would maybe not cause a flashback, but would stimulate the panic attacks based on just the trauma. And again, if he ever thought about the trauma, thought about the accident, he would go into kind of start having panic attacks and so on and forth, and because it might slip into a flashback. Okay, so those are the 5 that you need to have for anxiety disorders. So we're done with that category. And then I also, on this one, I have a link to a video from the movie The Ledger of Bagger Vance with Matt Damon. And so he was a World War I veteran, and he was a very talented golfer in the movie. And so when he came back from World War I, obviously he turned to alcohol and some other things. And finally somebody came and kind of started helping him. And then he started getting back into golf, but he hits his ball into the woods during this tournament. He goes in to find it, and he starts having these flashbacks to a battle in World War I that he fought. So again, you see it perfectly, and you'll see the panic attack that he starts having as a result of the flashback. So it's a pretty good, it's like a 4-minute clip real quickly. So if you saw the movie 1917, they call it shell shock. They had a whole bunch of names for it. We know PTSD has been around for a long time. That was some of the soldiers that kind of just have lost it because of the war. They're shaky, and so they call it war shock. It's just kind of, they have that gaze that they're no longer there. They're someplace else, which is the flashback. The idea that they're trying to cope with what they're dealing with, what they're seeing, what's happening to them. That's horrific. Okay. So you've got those 2 videos. So if you want to, they're just linked to the notes section. I got Emma and Glee, and then the Legend of Bagger Vance here that will help you kind of just see it. This is actually portrayed quite a bit in movies and TV shows. This was, it's kind of lost its limelight a little bit, but it's definitely still there. Okay. All right. If you have any questions, email me. Again, remember, I did extend the due date for the Chapter 6 stuff till Monday. So the 3rd or the 6th, I think, Monday the 6th. So you have a little bit more time to do that. But remember that you're working on that while you're working on this, while we continue on. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay? Have a good day.